Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back from your lunch break. We're almost there, guys. We're halfway through the second day, but don't despair. This is where we get some extra headline acts. And to join me in a moment is someone we've all been waiting for over the last 2 days. But just a couple of housekeeping things first. Because we want to ensure you get the best out of our content, you're inspired, and you learn all day long, we've got an extra session in at the end, which is going to be a session called Media Sparks, whereby you're going to see 3 of the hottest new startup companies in Miami pitching to you. And the best thing is, you get to choose the winner. So keep that in mind, guys. But before I go any further, we're going to have a fireside chat, just here on these sofas, with the one and only Dennis Crowley, the founder of Foursquare.
I didn't time it very well. I should have walked
That's
right
okay.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you. So we've talked a lot over the last 2 days. We've talked about reaching consumers and consumers being right next door to brands. And obviously, you launching Foursquare gave those brands an idea of where everyone was, so the whole geolocation piece. Mm-hmm. It's certainly been an interesting 5 years for you guys at Foursquare.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, you launched, 2009, and kind of almost changed the social media landscape.
Yeah, it was 3 of us around a kitchen table in 2009, and now we're about 170 people across 5 different offices. So it's been quite the explosive story ride for Foursquare. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, so on the kitchen table, so like all good albums these days seem to be made in people's bedrooms.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the
lounges.
cheapest office space around is your kitchen table.
Absolutely. And what was the kind of inspiration for Foursquare? Kind of what gave you the idea of launching a geolocation-based app?
Yeah, a lot of the early thinking was it's kind of selfish. It's like, how do we make software that we want to use? How do we make things that make New York easier to use? And as we started building it and letting other people use it, it's like, okay, well, how do we make the software that makes just cities easier to use? How do we make software that makes the real world easier to use? And really that's, it's kind of the essence of what it is. It's like our big belief is that, there'll be hundreds of millions of people that are carrying a little piece of software in their pocket, and it will constantly be telling them about, hey, these people are nearby, these are the great places to go to, these are the things you need to pay attention to. Like, that's obviously going to be something that we all have on our phones in our pockets, and like, we should be the company that's building that stuff.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the things is, how do check-in and geolocation still work for millennials these days? We've seen all these other new apps, all these other ideas of getting them closer to millennials, and geolocation kind of was there. Then Facebook obviously launched the location apps. They knew where everyone was. What do you do, and how do you kind of differentiate yourselves from competitors like that?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. Like in the last 5 years, I think we've seen a lot of people that have been, inspired by some of the work that we've done. Like, you see check-ins in Facebook. You see see a lot of other companies that have been in our space. Like, ultimately, I think if you look at the whole social media landscape, people just like to share little nuggets of what they're doing, whether it's a photo, whether it's a tweet, whether it's like, hey, I'm on stage at this conference, hey, I'm staying at this hotel. People just like to share those individual moments. And so, the thing that we've learned at Foursquare is that, hey, there's people that want to share those because they like to share. There's people that want the utility of it, like they like to know where their friends are, they like to know when people are near them. And then I think the thing that we've gotten really good at as a company is understanding, like, hey, if we get all these data points, people telling us like the places they go to, the places they enjoy, the places they go back to, what can we do with that? How can we make this personalized travel guide, this personalized guide of the world, based off of all that data? So those are the things that we're most focused on.
And how does that work? I mean, obviously some people get worried now that you open up your email and you've got 100 spam emails. Obviously, it's quite a bit stalkerish in places. How do you kind of counteract that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like if you kind of look at like what's happened all over the internet in the last couple years, like everything's gotten personalized. Like, the stuff that you shop for on Amazon is personalized based upon what you click on. The movies that Netflix serves up, the music that Spotify recommends to you. It's all based on what you've done in the past. And all of our thinking is, hey, places should be exactly the same way. Like we shouldn't, like if we all right now search for, hey, I need a restaurant in Miami tonight, we will all get exactly the same results if we go to Google or if we go to Yelp. Like that just seems so broken to us. Like we all have different tastes, we all like different things, we all have different friends that run around and experience different things. Like we should all get different search results. And that's the product that we've been trying to build. Now the thing is, like, check-ins have been amazing at helping us build these tools that enable us to do that. Like, if people check in all the time, we get all this signal about what you like and what your friends like and what's popular and what's not, and we can use that to power these personalized local search tools. But now I think we're getting into the stage where a lot of these apps can run in the background. Like, we can understand, like, without people checking in, that, like, hey, you're at this hotel. Hey, you're in Miami. Hey, you went to this restaurant. And so if we can just listen to these signals that we're getting from the phone, like, how can we make the tools that we build and the guides that we make that much more interesting and that much more personalized?
So almost kind of a more personalized TripAdvisor. So like you'd create a music list or a playlist with Pandora with Spotify. But actually now what we're saying is that the kind of future is this personalized rating system for your favorite restaurants, favorite movies, favorite places.
It's exactly right. Like, for folks that have traveled before and have ever traveled with like a big guidebook, like a Let's Go Europe or something like that, like a lot of Foursquare's inspiration comes from those books. Like, we're all using exactly the same guides all the time. That seems so broken. Everyone should have their own custom personalized guide everywhere that they go, anywhere that they go. And that's the stuff that we're really focused on building.
And then I suppose, how do you make that different to what else is out there? So we've seen a big growth in the vloggers that are out there. So yesterday we had Brody Smith on here, who basically was a great Frisbee champion and decided that he could do tricks with Frisbees. And one of the key things for him was he's obviously doing these videos. Brands want to advertise with him because he's attracting 10 million people, 10 million views to his videos. And now he's moved on to that next level where actually record companies are coming to him and saying, I wish to put my new song with you. So he puts the new song soundtrack to his video, and then he gets those advertising brands then want to come onto him even more. How do you keep that momentum going? How do you say, actually, this is what we need to do? These are the key things that brands need to bear in mind when they're looking at services such as Foursquare.
Yeah, sure. So, we have a lot of organic growth through users, the user community and the users doing things. We have a bunch of brands that participate, like they'll make brand guides for different cities. But I think the stuff that's really interesting, and to your point here, is that over the last couple of years, we've been crafting a lot of different advertising tools, specifically for brands, for big box retailers, and for local merchants, so you can get your message out in front of people when they're at specific places. And we've seen brands use this for a number of different purposes. Whether it's like, hey, because you checked in at this park, we will show you, we'll show you an ad for running sneakers. Because you happen to be at a bar, we'll show you an ad for Heineken products. And like when we talk to advertisers, one of the things we hear all the time is people want more advanced targeting. They want to be able to reach specific segments of users. Where are they? Where have they been? And like the foundation of the Foursquare product is built off of that idea. Like, of course, we're building all these amazing guides and tools for our end users, the personalized local guide. But kind of the data exhaust of that allows us to build these really amazing advertising tools that allow brands to reach people that are in specific places, or people that we think are going to go to these specific places, or people that have been to those places in the past. And that's something unique that Foursquare does. That there's really not a lot of other properties that do that, and we do that because we're so focused on location.
And data that you brought up there obviously is a key thing in many ways, also quite a controversial thing as well, particularly with social media apps and the web. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of secure the data? How do you, and how does that work for companies in terms of, actually you control that data, you know exactly what's happening with those people. Do you get brands, are you giving that information out? How do you deal with that kind of personal protection?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because, a lot of the Foursquare story is based around like, hey, if you tell Foursquare where you are, we'll let people know. In the past, it's been if you tell Foursquare where you are, we'll let your friends know where you can find you. We'll let help you find guys certain things. What we've done this past year, and I think some of the folks in the room have probably noticed this, is that we took the one big Foursquare app that we had and we broke it into two different pieces. We have this app called Swarm. That's where all the check-ins live, and that's the fastest and easiest way to keep up and meet up with your friends. And now Foursquare has become a little bit more streamlined, so it's primarily a local guide. And so one of the things that we found is that people were confused for a while, like, hey, I want to use the local guide part of Foursquare, but I don't want my friends to know where I am all the time. And that's one of the reasons that we split the product into two different pieces. And now that it's split, we can tell much cleaner, much crisper messages around each product. But going back to your question about users' privacy and making sure that we're respecting that, It's been our thesis really since the beginning that, hey, if you're giving us data about the things that you like and the places that you go to, like that's your data. You should be able to go in there and delete it if you want to, or delete all of it if you want to. And so we give people the tools to be able to do those types of things. And also when we work with advertisers, it's never like, hey, I want to specifically target something at dentists. It's more broad categories. It's like, hey, people that have been to dive bars, people that have been to airports in the last couple weeks, people that go to the gym regularly. And so by breaking them into broad segments, it's easier for advertisers to work with that.
And then in terms of key markets for you guys, how key has Latin America become as a market for the product, and how has it been picked up here? Obviously, mobile penetration is huge here, so there's a great opportunity to kind of get involved. Are you just touching the surface here, or?
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons that we came down here to speak at the conference. It's Latin America is one of the fastest growing areas of Foursquare usage for us, specifically Mexico and Brazil. So we've been working with our friends at IMS to help bring advertising products to these specific regions, and we're starting to do that. They're starting to perform really well. Those audiences are growing fantastically well, and part of the reason to come down and speak on stage is to let you guys know that we've built these amazing advertising tools. We're building these amazing products, and we're really interested in exploring advertising opportunities in these Latin American markets.
And I suppose one thing the audience wants to know is kind of like in terms of creating a startup. We've obviously got this competition we have later on today, which is all about the new startups in Latin America. As a kind of startup man yourself, are you constantly kind of in an incubator style lab dreaming up these new ideas? How does it work? How do they come to you? Where do you draw on the inspiration?
Well, we still got to stay super focused on Foursquare, right? And that's always the big challenge, because I think there's so many things that I'm personally interested in, but then Foursquare, there's so many problems to still solve around personalized local search, around making these personalized guides to the world. The stuff that I'm getting really excited about recently has been, how do we take all the awesome data that we have and make it work not just on your phone, but make it work on all these other devices. My phones, everyone's got their phone in their pocket all the time, but most Foursquare data is locked up in the hold on a second, let me just ask Foursquare a question and I'll get an answer out. And that's the way that we all use our phones. But it's it's our belief, and it's my belief, that in the next couple years, the software will just be running in the background, and it'll tell you about the things that you need to pay attention to. And it might buzz your phone, or it might buzz your watch, or it might show up in your car when you put your car into park. And these are messages like, oh, you just stopped at the mall and you're about to park your car. Here are the 3 shops you should check out because they're running specials we think would be interesting. Oh, you just walked into this room. My watch would buzz and say, hey, there's 3 people here that you need to meet while you're at this conference. Oh, you just landed in Miami. Here are 3 restaurants you should try based off of Foursquare's super smart personalization. And so we think a lot about how do we extend that experience to the other screens that we're all going to be carrying with us. And so there's plenty of stuff to keep us busy.
Yeah. And interesting, talking about the review side of things, and obviously this is a restaurant you should check out, these are the ratings. How do you get around that kind of, I suppose, that editorial integrity compromise if you've got a brand that's sponsoring or part of the advertising fraternity on Foursquare, and suddenly someone's written up 4 or 5 bad reviews about said restaurant or area? How do you kind of deal with that? How do you kind of get around that?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Our advertisers are broken into a couple different buckets. We have the big brands, we have the big box retailers, and then we've got the local merchants. And so, you don't really see a lot of people reviewing brands on Foursquare. It's more we have the advertising tools for those folks. But for local merchants, we want the local merchants to be really heavily invested in their Foursquare experience. We have almost 2 million merchants, 2 million places in the world. These are bakeries and coffee shops and dive bars and little hotels that have claimed their spot, and they're using Foursquare to help drive customers in. And so people leave tips in Foursquare, and sometimes the tips are positive and sometimes the tips are negative. And occasionally we have to tell those merchants hey, people are going to say positive and negative things here, but you should guide people towards having positive experiences, and they'll write positive things about you.
You've had no kind of real conflicts,
We haven't really yet. I think one of the really great things that we've done with Foursquare is that, the tip system. We don't call them reviews, we call them tips, and they because of that, and because they're so small, and because there's a positive sentiment behind them, like most of the tips are relatively positive. Like you would never, it just seems like it's not part of Foursquare culture to go in and be like, oh, I hate this bakery, I would never go here. It's more like, oh, I went here and the best cupcake to get is this one, and that's why you should come here. And so people leave a lot of positive comments on Foursquare, and I think that's like a good vibe that we have going within the service.
And you talked about how the company split and tried to become more relevant. How do you continue to be more relevant as a startup and as a brand? We see people evolving, people moving, tastes change, so people, things go out of fashion.
Sure.
How do you kind of maintain that you stay in fashion? If you're, any type of startup, I suppose the key is that longevity of marketing. How do you achieve that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think like social media in general is like a kind of, like people get generally fickle about things, like things go in and out of vogue. And I think you could say that like the same thing has happened for the check-in. Like, hey, check-in was at one point like the way that everyone was sharing all the time, and then maybe it's photos, and now maybe it's messaging, and regardless of what it is, like the way to keep yourself relevant during all of that time is to really to create products that people can't live without. And our thinking is we should be making utilities. Like we're not making toys, we're making utilities. And personalized local search and these personalized guides are utilities that we think live on forever. Like maps never get stale, guides never get stale. It's like those are things that people always need in their lives. And we're thinking, hey, if we can just make the best versions of those that have ever existed, we'll be around for a long time.
So you've got some tough competitors in that world. Obviously, you've got people like TripAdvisor. We mentioned on the guidebooks, you've got Lonely Planet. I mean,
sure.
All of those guys have got a digital version to them. So I mean, that's a tough market to be in.
Yeah, I think it's tough because it's crowded, right? But a lot of these a lot of the guides have been around for a long time, and now like they have like a website, and they're trying to get the website to work on mobile, and like those products work, but they're not revolutionary. And I think that our approach to this whole space, like how do you use all the data that we've collected about where all of the phones have been and the way that they move through space to make personalized local guides? Like that's a big idea. That's something that first of all, it's very, very hard to do. It's very complicated. We're doing a great job at it, but we're not anywhere near the finish line. And it's just like, I think like it's baked into the DNA of our company. Like we're kind of a big data company that's making these travel guides, and all the data comes from user-generated content and the way that phones move. That's a lot different than I think some of these companies that were started 5 years ago, started 10 years ago, a little bit longer than that are just trying to figure out how to move from web onto mobile. Like playing this big data analysis game like requires you to build a fundamentally different type of company than I think like a guide service would. And like you can see that in the DNA and kind of the makeup of our company. Like we're a very heavy product and engineering organization. We've a whole bunch of us used to work at Google. We have a lot of data scientists that used to work in Google and other like similar companies. And like we have a very heavy data focus in terms of making these products. And it's I think the profile of our company looks a lot different than some of these other competitors.
And it's interesting you mentioned data again, because one of the key things that's been spoken about here has been measurement. So
sure.
Actually measuring that data, in some circles, some of the talks I've been involved in, we've talked about, has the cookie crumbled in terms of following the user around the different experiences, particularly now that they're going from computer, how do you predict their journey from a computer suddenly onto a TV, onto a mobile? Is that something you guys are looking at as a company in terms of?
We always hear people say like, hey, location is the new cookie, which is, it's interesting, right? Because like you always have some type of computing device on you, and the devices are starting to become more aware of the places that they are and the places that they've been to and the way that they travel. And I think, Foursquare is probably at the leading edge of building a lot of tools that allow advertisers and brands to take advantage of that. Like, where else can you go to say, hey, we want to target people that have specifically been to gyms in the last 7 days, people that have been to airports twice in the last 2 months. Like you can create those types of customer segments off of Foursquare data and with our advertising tools. And that's really exciting. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of a lot of that technology and a lot of that targeting. And it's fun for us to not only get to build these amazing consumer tools, but to also start to build these really interesting advertising tools on top of that.
Actually, you're right. I mean, that key, I would imagine, the kind of nirvana for that sort of data is actually that pre-targeting. So you can work out a journey of someone going from a television to a mobile. You can tell when their toaster is about to pack up, so suddenly an ad is served to them which says, here's a brand new toaster from Tefal. That would be the nirvana, I'm imagining.
Even just like the ability to predict where people are going to be, be able to, if you look at a lot of Foursquare data over time for a specific user, and like we do like experiments internally on our own data sets to see like, hey, what is the probability of Dennis being in this particular neighborhood on Tuesday at 9 p.m.? And like these aren't products that we've rolled out yet, but we can start to think about those things. Like, okay, what are the odds of if Dennis was at this coffee shop, he either goes to this place or this place after? And can you use that to predict recommendations and predict places that people should go and predict where people are going to be and the intersections they might meet up with? And you can imagine, as you get a little bit down into the future, like what does that look like for predictive advertising as well?
So almost quite scarily, quite stalkerish.
It's only scary because like we don't live with it yet. And I think one of the things that we're starting to realize at Foursquare is that we build all this stuff and we're super, super close to it. And like I've got that watch that buzzes when I walk into a restaurant and tells me, Foursquare notification comes up. It's like, oh, this is the cocktail that you should order. And the first time you see it, you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then you live with it for a while and you're like, it's very clearly that's the future that we're all gonna have. And it might sound crazy to you guys, but I think that's where we'll be in a year or so. And we've been doing this for a long time. I had a startup before Foursquare that was doing similar check-in stuff. It's called Dodgeball. And even back like 10 years ago, people were telling me, no one's ever going to check in. That's not interesting. Nobody wants this stuff. Like it's not a business. And we've proven those people that have said that wrong over and over and over again. Like we can make services that people use. We can make services that advertisers want. We can make these amazing personalized local guides based off of it. There's so much stuff we can do with this interesting data. And we're proving that there's a market for those types of services that people thought were crazy 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's very, very true indeed. And obviously that whole startup phenomena, you have Silicon Valley, obviously, where all these companies come from. Actually, you're part of the New York kind of Soho Silicon Valley. Is that now becoming the key hotbed for new startup companies in the States?
It depends who you ask, right? Like, we're based out of New York. Like, for the first couple of years of Foursquare, everyone used to ask me, the first question was, why didn't you start the company in San Francisco? And the answer was, like, because we live in New York. That's why. We weren't going to move out there. Anyway, so, San Francisco is like the traditional hotbed for startups, and it still is. We have an office out there. We've got 30, 35 people. There's a ton of engineers out there. There's a lot more engineers out there than there are in New York. But, New York is the home of a couple amazing startups. Like, we've got ourselves. We've got, the Tumblrs, the Etsy's. I mean, there's a whole crop of mature New York startups, and that's a lot different than the way New York was 5 years ago even.
Yeah. And who should we be looking out for in New York? Who are the ones to keep an eye on? Who should we be investing in, I suppose?
Oh, you got to be looking at Foursquare all the time. Right? Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's a whole crop of new startups that are coming up. There's a lot of people that are focused on healthcare. There's a lot of people focused on wellness and exercise. There's a lot of like data technology companies, a lot of advertising technology companies coming out of New York. So it's like the market's matured a lot. It's been really fun to see. And we've played a big role in bringing awareness to the New York tech scene, which I think is a nice side benefit too.
Absolutely. And I know we're running out of time. I can see the clock ticking down very quickly. Yeah, absolutely. It's gone very quickly. But one of the key things, I suppose, what does the future hold for Dennis Crowley? And do you cash in with an IPO? Do you go back to the incubator? Or you just simply retire and head out to the Hamptons?
We still got a lot of work to do with Foursquare. People ask that question all the time, like, when is the IPO? It's like, we still got a lot of work to do. And there's plenty of options for us in the future. Like, are we an independent company? Do we end up as part of another company? Like, I don't know the answers to those questions. The thing that's been interesting though is, we've been doing this about 5 years. The products are really maturing. Like, it's kind of awesome that, like, if I ask, I'm sure everyone in this room knows what Foursquare is or maybe has tried it before. Like, that's awesome. That really inspires me. That like, hey, there's this huge awareness, this huge global awareness for the stuff that we're building. But then also, like, the company's generating a significant amount of revenue. Like, we have a whole bunch of advertising products. We have 6 different revenue sources that are coming in. We've been doubling revenue. The last 2 years, we're on pace to double it again this year. We're looking like we can double it next year. Like, the thing works. Like, this thing that people thought was crazy for the longest time, it works. It's like a real business. And once you get to that point, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. And so that's it's really exciting for us. And it's like, and to expand internationally and to be able to come here and say, hey, there's these whole other areas of the world that like weren't open for business, a year ago, but now those are things that we're focusing on. That's a lot of fun for us.
Absolutely. So I know we've got a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to hog all the questions, so I'll put my glasses on so I can actually see past the first 2 rows. Does anyone have a question here? You need to keep my record up. I was in the other room, and I haven't lost yet. Come on. There must be at least one question here. Ah, perfect. Can we get a microphone to this guy over here, please?
10.
Why did we divide Foursquare and Swarm?
Yeah, in 2 apps. Why?
Oh, Great question.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
Of course. So one of the things that we found is that the Foursquare app that we spent 4 years building, we had just crammed a lot of stuff in there. We crammed the check-in, we crammed search, we crammed the list, we crammed badges, we crammed all these things in there. And us, as the creators of this thing, for us it makes perfect sense. Well, what we were finding after we hit 30, 40, 50 million downloads is that the story was being lost on people. People were like, am I supposed to use it to search or to check in? And is it okay if I don't check in and only use it to search? And you can't have users asking you those questions. Otherwise, people are just so confused that they won't use the products. We were hearing that all the time. It's like, it is just too complex. And so that's what we ended up doing. And what we ended up doing is splitting it into two different pieces that have very simple stories, very simple products. Each, I think there's like 5 or 6 screens in the Swarm app, and there's maybe a dozen or so screens in the Foursquare app. But everything is so much cleaner and crisper and simpler than it was before, which makes the job of our marketing team, it makes the job of our sales team that much easier to be like, hey, it's not 100 different things. There's one product for keeping up with friends. There's one product for finding and discovering great places. It's all about simplicity.
Thank you very much, guys. And I see a big sign that says time up. So it's been great talking to you, Dennis. Much appreciated. I'm sure, and his PR person is probably going to shoot me when I get off stage, he will be around to answer your questions if you wish to ask him.
Can I assign everyone in the room some homework?
Absolutely.
Okay, just real quick. I don't know if you folks use Google Maps or if you use Yelp or TripAdvisor or other service. I don't know if people are visiting Miami or here for good. But the next time you go and look for a local restaurant, next time you look for a bar, next time you're traveling a trip, try the new Foursquare products out, and then let me know what you think of them. I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter. I would love to hear your feedback. That's your homework. Let me know how you make out, and then I'd love to hear back from you.
Cool. And I'll collect my check from Dennis for allowing him to do that advert for about 100 grand at the end of the day. But thank you very much, Dennis.
That was fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.